How often should you get data to look at your compensation structure? Hey everybody, it's John with Contract Diagnostics again, and I talked with what I call a friend yesterday. His name is David, let's call him David, and he calls us every single year and he obtains compensation data. He uses our compensation tools to discuss it, whether or not he asked for changes or not, and he's ran into a hiccup this year. The last couple of years, he has had increases in his compensation based on the conversation, based on the discussion. This year they said no. They said, we can't pay you more. They said, this is all we can do. This is what our report says. But the data that we pulled shows something different. So he says, look, my data says this. Why can't you increase it to what the data says? And they said, because our data is different. And we use a different data set. And so now we're at a standstill. They're saying we can't, our data says it's different. His data says you should have a significant raise of 8%. It's a big number. He's a highly compensated physician. So who is right? And how do you handle this argument? Well, there's lots of ways. Of course, we think transparency is very important in employer-employee relations and that these should be discussed on a very routine basis. And I think as we want transparency, it's important to ask the employer for their report. Because if they just have a secret sauce that they're offering a certain dollar amount, I want to know why. I told David that he should ask them for the report and see what they say. If they say no, I would ask why. Most of the time reports, they don't just have a specific number, okay, especially reports that the hospital's generating. So if a physician grabs a copy of the Sullivan-Cotter data or the MGMA data or any specific data set, it's going to have a number, okay? Maybe the median is a certain dollar amount, but it doesn't tell the story about how much call they're taking, how much outreach they're doing, what the staffing is like, if they have a nurse practitioner overlay or not. And hospitals have tools. We have them here. It's a much different process and a much more costly one for us as far as how running these analysis. But you input everything to this specific physician. It pulls how many surgeons are in a defined geographic area and how many should there be. So it pulls need, right? It pulls their case volume. It pulls what they're doing and how they should be compensated because of what percentile they're in regarding their profession. You can input call, you can put a nurse practitioner supervision, you can input medical directorships and all those things, and it gives what is a new fair market value, if you will. And a hospital can present this as a number, but it's never a number, it's always a range. Now, the tool that we have has multiple ranges. There's a green range, there's an orange range, and then there's a red range. And of course, you can imagine that they all mean their respective things. But just because a physician may fall in the red range doesn't mean that they can't increase it. Or just because they're in the green range doesn't mean they can't put them in a yellow range. It's all about how they document and all about the story that you tell and they hear and they come to the table with. We talked to the company that helps us with these reports, and we said, okay, so if it's a red report, when we were looking at the tool to begin with, we said, okay, so if it's a red report, the hospital, they can't do that, so we need to be cautious on those. And they said, no, John, we issue red reports all the time. We just have to have good documentation as to the why of physicians in the red, meaning they're not paid illegally. They may be paid higher than they should be, but that's okay if there's a particular reason. Now, if you're a surgeon generating 10th percentile, generating in the 10th percentile, and you want to be, paid at the 97th percentile because you take, an extra 2 days of call per month, I don't think that's reasonable for the employer to approve. And I would expect them to say, no, you cannot be in that red range. But depending on your story, maybe it makes sense for you to be there based on how long you've been there and what you've contributed to the account and how much call you're taking on a routine basis and the other tasks and duties that you may have at the facility, the fact that you may or may not get paid for that call, or you may or may not get paid for additional admin time, okay? So there's all types of things that can go into the calculation. But if the employer says we're not going to share the report, I think that's a breakdown in communication, and I want you all to have a very transparent discussion with them. You've got a report, they're saying you're wrong. I'm okay with that as long as they can show why they're right. And if they're not showing the why, then I think that's disrespectful to the physician. If they say, well, because I said so. I have small children at home. They're 11 and 9, and I think, you get away with that for a certain while as a parent by saying, because I said so, and then eventually they get old enough and they don't buy that anymore. So you got to come up with better answers. And I think if a facility says, well, because we can't, this is what the report says, I say, let me see the report. And again, just because they're saying, well, we use, let's say, Sullivan-Cotter 50th percentile, and maybe the physician gets MGMA 50th percentile, and they might be different numbers. But again, what survey are they using from Sullivan-Cotter? They've got many different data sets. So if a general surgeon in Chicago is using Sullivan-Cotter to analyze compensation, is it the hospital-based data? Is it the large practice data? Is it a metropolitan area over 1 million? Is it all practice data? Are they looking at a geographical area instead of the actual state or city or region? So there's all types of numbers that can come when the employer says, I use a data set and we use 50th percent or 75th percent. So I think we've got to clarify. We've got to ask them for those things. And I think this is where good transparency and honest communication come through. If they're simply refusing to change your compensation or refusing to show you anything, all they are is dictating a compensation structure and saying sign it or else, I think it's great to have other competing offers. I never think it's a bad idea to appropriately and quietly look for jobs and see what's on the open market. Have counter offers. If something's $1 or $2 more for an RVU, they're not going to let you go over that, even if their compensation structure says that they should keep you at a certain dollar amount. It costs $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 to replace a physician if he or she departs a position, depending on a lot of factors. And it's not worth it to them to lose you over $1 or $2 on an RVU, or even $50,000, or maybe even $100,000 a year to keep their established physician there. Non-competes have been in the news. We may or may not have non-competes banned in a few months, so that might change the whole dynamic on show me or I might take off. So I'm excited to see what that means for the renegotiating capital of physicians all across the country. But I think if the employer's not showing you the data, there's a breakdown in communication, and I think that should be evaluated as well. That everyone should be open and honest with these things, and I think if they're giving a report by a third-party vendor, that they should open up the report and show it to you. I think it's fair, and I think you've deserved it. And I think that you should keep asking that question until they show it to you or make concessions on their compensation plan. If we can help analyze anything compensation-wise, if they're pushing back and you need some verbiage on it, give us a call. We're here at Contract Diagnostics to help you with anything you need. You can set up a free call on our website or email us info@contractdiagnostics anytime.